I don't have a lot of time, really, to sit with you guys today to explain, all of the ins and outs of this service. But I am really thankful to have, about 45, 50 minutes for us to really dig into this, go over the Lifeline, what it is, how it can help people. So just a little bit to start out about the Lifeline, what it is 988 is the number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The Lifeline has had a lot of different phone numbers over the years. You may know 1-800-SUICIDE, 273-TALK is another. All of those old dialing codes for the Lifeline still are operational, but in 2022, a bill was passed federally to mandate the number change to this new 3-digit dialing code. We were all very excited about that opportunity because if there's one thing that we've known about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline's 10-digit dialing codes is that no matter what 10-digit dialing code that we may have selected, it presented a difficult barrier to access the service for someone who might be in a mental health crisis. Having a 3-digit dialing code like 988 gives us an opportunity to be infinitely more memorable, recognizable, marketable, all of that good stuff for that person who might need that life-saving service connection to crisis care. Another shift that happened in 2022, no longer are we the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We are now the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. A very subtle shift, but very important to us as well. In the past, folks identified that they knew to reach out through the Lifeline when what they were experiencing was a suicidal crisis. Folks were not as sure if the Lifeline was an appropriate space for them, when what they were experiencing is what they would call a crisis more generally. But we really want to encourage folks, if they're experiencing a moment of mental health crisis, if they feel themselves approaching that moment, if they're worried on behalf of someone else, those are all incredibly valuable and important times to reach out, talk to a crisis counselor as well. So, just a little bit more about the Lifeline, like I mentioned, that happened in 2022. So we've got a lot of good data about how this number change has really impacted us. I'll be sharing more about that soon. But we really want to encourage anyone who is experiencing, like I said, broadly, thoughts of suicide, mental health crisis of any kind. That could be a crisis related to substance abuse. It could be a crisis related to domestic violence. Any kind of emotional distress are the types of folks that we're looking to connect with through the Lifeline. And that's a number that you can call, text, any time of day, 24/7. If you're in an area with poor cell service, you can get online, do an instant message chat with a crisis counselor as well at the Lifeline's website, 988lifeline.org. Video call services are the newest modality that the Lifeline introduced in late last year. It is still a limited service, but I think it's important for us to take some time to address it and talk about it. I'm going to be sharing a lot of different things about 988 with you today. I think it's important to remember that this is an evolving system. That what I'm sharing with you about what the Lifeline is today may not be true in 20 years, may not be true in 50 years, may not be true in 5 years. We're really working toward a system that meets the needs of that person experiencing crisis where they are at in an accessible manner. And one of the things that's really important in that mission is providing this service through a number of different modalities, a number of different sort of nets to capture that person who might be experiencing a suicidal crisis or a crisis related to mental health in a way that will work best for them. And I will allude to a lot of those different efforts that we've undertaken. But just to sort of start this conversation off, I want to maybe ask if it makes sense that someone who might consider calling the Lifeline would never consider texting, or someone who would be willing to text might never consider making a phone call. And that's fine. Ultimately, we want to be able to provide as many different avenues for someone to be able to connect with someone in a way that will make sense for them. So on the other end of that 988 number is a crisis counselor. That crisis counselor works with that person to help assure safety for that moment and support the de-escalation to help support a continued safety profile, an improved safety profile in the home without involving other links in the chain that are oftentimes associated with increased levels of acuity. I'm talking about spaces like the local ER, talking about spaces like the local jail, spaces where by and large a lot of individuals do receive crisis de-escalation services. But we're of the opinion that there is a less restrictive way to provide that de-escalation service. If there is a way for someone to de-escalate safely in their own home, sitting on their own couch, eating their own chips, petting their cat, talking with us, we think that that's a better outcome than involving the hospital or involving the police. So our counselors are highly trained. They receive well over 100 hours of their initial training that has multiple different components, role plays, observation, other online modules and other trainings that they'll engage with as well. And that's all to really assure that they're utilizing the best practices in crisis care. And that could look a lot of different ways. How are we assessing safety? What sort of protocol do we take when crafting a safety plan for someone with, for instance? And we also have the capacity to be able to assist that person with resource navigation, with safety planning, and with follow-up on the back end as well, all to really help that person through that what may be a very difficult moment in their life. So I just want to take a moment to explain physically what to expect when you reach out through 988. I think this is a very important piece to be able to share with people. For instance, most folks don't know that when you dial 988, the first thing you hear is a 35-second phone tree. I think it's important for us to message around the phone tree. Every day, we have a number of people who abandon their phone call to 988 because the first thing they hear within the first 10 seconds is a voice trying to direct them to a space that could be best for them. Like I've said, we really care about providing many different modalities through the Lifeline to assure a best service connection for someone. And this is what this phone tree aims to achieve. The Lifeline has taken on many different partnerships over the years with other programs aiming to provide life-saving care to people who may be experiencing crisis. So to that end, you can press 1 when you first dial 988 to connect with the Veterans Crisis Line. The Veterans Crisis Line is a really important service. It has a contact center actually located in Topeka. So that gives callers, especially from Kansas and Missouri as well, an opportunity to connect with a Veterans Crisis Contact Center that is physically near their location and has a good understanding of what services are offered to veterans in their area, what are different programs, agencies available to them that can help them with whatever their identified need may be at the time of the call. You can press 2 to connect with the Spanish subnetwork. The Spanish subnetwork is a smaller contingent of contact centers within the 988 system. They offer that same crisis de-escalation support, assurance of safety, safety planning piece in Spanish, which gives individuals an opportunity to receive crisis counseling in their first language, whether that's English or Spanish. But translation services are available through the Lifeline. We're adding new languages all the time. I think right now we're up to 19. But the message should be that someone should expect to be able to receive crisis counseling in the language that they speak at home through the Lifeline, whether that's through the Spanish subnetwork or the larger network as a whole through translation services. And then, of course, you can press 3 to connect with Trevor Project for LGBTQ plus youth. Trevor Project is 988's most recent partnership, but we were very excited by the work that they do supporting individuals who are having a crisis that's broadly related to identity. Anyone under the age of 25 is welcome to reach out to Trevor Project to have that conversation. And of course, you'll remain on the line and get connected with a local crisis contact center. Important to note, there are about 220 crisis contact centers scattered all across the United States. Here in Kansas, we have 5. And they'll take calls from certain areas. So for instance, in Wyandotte County, they have a crisis contact center that answers calls from Wyandotte County. There's also a contact center in Johnson County that fields the calls that come in from Johnson. We're in a slightly different position where we are a primary contact center for 102 of Kansas's 105 counties. But we also answer some rollover calls from the other contact centers to really assure that that call from Kansas is being answered by a Kansas counselor. Like I mentioned with the Veterans Crisis Line, it's really important for that call to be answered locally, so that call counselor could have a good effort to be able to connect them with localized care. Really, 988 is a service that is the first sort of link in the chain of the crisis continuum. And I'll use that word a lot as we talk today, crisis continuum. What may initially begin with a service connection with one agency could unfold into other service connections to meet the need of that person who reaches out in need on that day. Important to note, though, 988 is a confidential, anonymous service. Someone who reaches out through the 988 system does have that ability to self-determine what exactly I am needing today that could help me establish safety for the immediate future. So over here on the right of this slide, I've got just a little graphic that kind of breaks down what our contacts have looked like over the years. So in 2022, you'll see that we took 2.5 million calls, 1 million chats, 0.3 million texts. So about 2/3 of the contacts that we take are through that call platform, and then another 1/3 are through text, and then the chat platform. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but these ratios, as we advertise more broadly about the Lifeline, we see the volume that we are taking on increase in really interesting ways. So in May of 2024, the monthly contacts for the Lifeline exceeded 500,000 for the first time. And it has maintained that level since. So in 2024, we fielded roughly right around 6 million contacts, which is about an 80% increase since the number change went live in May of 22. So just to say that a slightly different way, or show that a slightly different way, I've got some data here to share with you guys about those different modalities. So you'll see here the overall upward trend of contacts through the Lifeline. And the thing that we understand is that when we message safely about suicide prevention, around crisis care, it's not that we are creating more individuals who may be experiencing a suicidal crisis. It's that more individuals who know, more individuals who are experiencing a suicidal crisis know that there is a space where they can reach out to talk to someone. And that's the reason why we see increases in the amount of volume that we've taken on. So you'll see this big spike right here in July of 22, which hasn't really decreased. You'll see that those calls have continued to rise as the marketing for this service has really gotten out. There's been a lot of different sort of marketing campaigns around the Lifeline across the United States. And I think the most interesting line to see here is the text line. Before 988 implementation, not many people knew that you could text the Lifeline, but that's something that has changed a lot since the number change went live. Now we are actually fielding more texts than chats, and that's a number that's continuing to increase. I think that I've heard percentages, like the percentage increase and how many more text contacts we're taking since the number change, and it's just totally wild number, like 1,200%. So we're really excited to be able to market broadly around the different modalities of the Lifeline, because we understand that based off of personal preference, someone might choose to utilize one modality over another. Previously, I was a text and chat counselor through the text chat platform through the agency, and I was always very surprised to find with those phone calls that the Lifeline takes, something like 80% of the folks that reach out through that modality are folks over the age of 20. For the text and chat contacts, uh, by and large, over 80% of the people who reach out through that modality are people under the age of 20. So I think that really speaks to how providing this service in a number of different ways, through a number of different pathways, a number of different avenues, can really assure that someone who might be struggling connects with a service that makes sense for where they are at, or what their life experience might be. So just a little bit about crisis, really what it is. I've been using this crisis word a lot. I think it'd be good if we had some shared language here. Uh, Crisis is something that's very deeply self-defined, but there are some commonalities that we see across crises. Uh, Largely, what I like to share with people is that crisis moment happens when your ability to cope with life circumstances is being outmatched by life circumstances. So we can imagine how that might look different for each and every one of us. It might even look different for each and every one of us at different stages in our lives. For instance, what was a crisis for me when I was 15 years old may not be a crisis for me if it were to happen today. Similarly, there may be aspects of my coping that have atrophied. Maybe there are things that I would have been able to cope with well had I learned or understood them at 20 compared to now. So that's all to really say that crisis is something that is deeply personal for that person. Each one looks different, but we broadly understand that there's some aspect of change, intense change or intense loss that's often present for that person. And how that manifests, how that person responds to that crisis will be unique to that individual as well. There are warning signs that we can typically see that someone may be approaching a crisis related to mental health. That can often be challenging for that person who's experiencing that to recognize as well. But we also know that person, regardless of having, if they have forgotten or not, that person still has resources available to them. There are still strengths inherent to that person, and there are still protective factors present in that person's life, whether that person sees them in that moment or not. And in fact, that's often something that we see, is that person who is experiencing that crisis may have a difficult time seeing those things. Oftentimes, the things that our counselors are doing is listening for those things. What are those resources that would be helpful? Or what are those strengths that I've had in the past that are difficult to tap into? Or what are the things that are present in my life that have kept me safe until now? Oftentimes, we'll hold on to those things until the end of the conversation. We really want to reach a place of de-escalation where we can have a collaborative conversation about what safety for the immediate future looks like with that person. And oftentimes that's a moment where we'll bring back some of those things. You know, uh, I heard you say a lot about how important taking care of your dog is, and how much that has really informed how you take on every day. I'm wondering if taking care of your dog makes sense tonight as something to stay safe for the immediate future. So it looks different for everyone, but largely we want to help that person plan for how do I get through just tonight. Another message that I really share with people is I really see these programs as very akin to the various anonymous programs that are present here in the United States. I'm talking about like Gamblers Anonymous, Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. Often talk about this concept of what does sobriety for today look like? When we're talking to someone who engages with AA, that concept of sobriety for the rest of your life, that could be a very overwhelming prospect for that person. Similarly, the concept of safety for the rest of your life might be an overwhelming concept for someone who might be experiencing a suicidal crisis. So we really work to reach a place where how do we find assurances that we'll be able to stay safe for just the immediate future. Oftentimes, what we find for that person uh, is that they are experiencing incredible loneliness. They feel incredibly alone. When we combine that with feeling like a burden, a feeling of burdensomeness, that no matter what, no matter what I say or who I share this with, it makes things more complicated or it makes things harder for myself or the person I'm sharing these things with. When we see those two things combine, uh, that's when we start to recognize that suicide could be a real option when acquiring capability comes into the picture as well. So we'll work with people around assuring safety to be able to work through that immediate moment because we often find that that crisis is a very short-term event. There's research that shows that that crisis moment uh, can last, uh, it can be as short as a 5-minute sort of moment. And then that person outside of that moment is able to much more cogently use resources, strengths, protective factors that might be present to them. But oftentimes we find that person may have a brief moment where those things are forgotten. So that's why being able to have this easy to remember number that's accessible through a number of different modalities is incredibly important for that person that might be in or approaching that moment. So I've already alluded to a lot of the different things that our crisis counselors do when they're talking with someone. Uh, but I just want to dive a little more deeply into that here. Uh, our counselors are really trained to be reflective listeners. Uh, really, the person that's calling through the lifeline is guiding that conversation. Oftentimes, that person who is calling hasn't really had the opportunity to share all of the different aspects of what they've experienced with someone. Oftentimes, that's an incredibly important aspect of the intervention that we provide. It's just sitting and listening with that person. Uh, Sometimes that looks like uh, being a little hands-on and guiding how the conversation moves. But largely, we want to give that person an opportunity to really dive through the different sort of aspects of what has been going on in their life and give them an opportunity to sort of explore, hey, what could make sense as a next step. We are constantly through that conversation providing suicide screening and assessment. Uh, like I said, we want to listen to that caller's story to get an understanding of sort of the different aspects that are present there. And we really want to work with them in their ambivalence around life and death, giving them an opportunity to sort of explore that ambivalence that is oftentimes restrictive in other spaces. After we've reached a place of de-escalation, which often we find that talking is all we need to be able to reach that point of de-escalation. Once we've reached that place, we really want to have a conversation about what staying safe for now looks like I've mentioned. We want to do that in a collaborative manner because that's what assures a solution that's going to make the most sense for that person that's calling. We don't want to make suggestions that don't make sense, for instance, or could be too, what's the word I'm thinking of? Too acute for what that person might be able to do at that moment. For instance, someone who has never done yoga before, it might not be a great suggestion to say, hey, some people in this circumstance, they find that doing yoga is really helpful. as the person might share, hey, I've got a broken leg. That's not going to work for me. So we really work to find solutions to assure safety for the immediate future in ways that make sense for that person. How do we get through tonight? And then also that piece around resource navigation and referral. We often do a lot of work around triaging with clients, helping them get through the front door at different agencies, different organizations that they've identified could be helpful for what they're struggling with at that moment. And then, of course, follow up. Like I've mentioned, that person oftentimes feels incredibly alone, uh, feels like a burden when they tell someone about what they've been experiencing. So when we also follow up with that person on the back end, we can really address that feeling of burdensomeness as well. We can make that statement, hey, we had this hard conversation. You told me a lot of these, frankly, kind of complicated things, and I'm still here wanting to have this conversation with you. I want to check in. I want to just see how some of those things that we talked about in our first conversation went. So that gives us an opportunity to sort of address that feeling of burdensomeness and also check back in with that person, make sure that the safety plan that we crafted is working for them, is something that is helping to assure continued safety. So just want to briefly go over chat and text contacts because it is slightly different. Uh, like I've mentioned, chat is just another avenue to connect with a crisis counselor. There are a lot of different reasons why someone might choose to connect with chat-based services over calling. It could be important to check with someone that you might be worried about. Maybe you've mentioned the lifeline to them. It may be helpful to ask them what modality they're thinking about reaching out through. Uh, and then be able to maybe offer some helpful guidance in that arena. Uh, so the wait times for chat, just based off of counselor availability, do tend to be a little longer. You can expect to be connected when you call 988 after that 35-second phone tree. Very proud to share that we average as a state, Kansas as a state averages answering that phone call within 15 seconds, under 15 seconds. So nationwide, that's largely the circumstance that folks are looking at. They can expect to be connected through call in under 30 seconds. Just based off of counselor availability, folks will wait just a little longer to connect with a chat or text counselor. Right now, the average wait time is about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So during that time, they are connected with a page that connects them or has national mental health services listed on it that person can scroll through, find a service connection that might make sense for them while they wait for a crisis counselor. But like I've mentioned, the Lifeline cares very deeply about connecting that person with localized care. So that person will definitely want to remain in the queue if that service connection piece is what they're really needing or looking for. Remain in the queue to connect with that local crisis counselor who may have a better understanding of, hey, what are those local services in my area that I could connect with that could make sense for me today. The newest modality that the Lifeline has begun offering is video call services. Now, I really think that this service is the future of 988. Being able to have eyes on that person who might be really struggling, I think is very important for this service. And also is incredibly important for historically underserved populations of the Lifeline as well. I'm talking about people who may be deaf or hard of hearing, people who may have difficulty communicating over the phone or via text, folks who may not be able to have their needs met through a phone call or through a text-based communication. What could that service connection look like through this platform? So right now, video call services are something that is being constrained in certain ways. It's only provided by one center located in Missouri called Deaf Lead. It is right now really intended for deaf, hard of hearing folks or folks who experience IDD, who are having incredible difficulty connecting over the phone, communicating over the phone, or communicating over chat or text. So there do tend to be long wait times for this service. The average wait time is about 15 minutes to connect with video call services. There is currently expansion planned by the Lifeline, our SAMHSA, our federal whatever accreditor. There are plans to expand this service to be able to meet the need that is being recognized nationwide. So all that to really say that folks who do reach out through video call services may be encouraged to utilize TTY and then call 988. Again, like I've said, I am very hopeful of a future where I'm talking about very different things. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. I really believe that video call services is going to be the pillar when we're talking about the Lifeline that folks will be most familiar with in the future. Right now, though, that expansion has been undergoing. The pilot that we underwent last year was incredibly successful. So I'm really excited for a future where I am talking about expanded video call services. And then I want to share just briefly with you about Hey HQ, talk a little bit about local crisis lines generally, because local crisis lines are very much a part of this sort of network as well. So Hey HQ is a peer-to-peer youth support line. It's available to anyone under the age of 18 that wants to talk to someone about what's going on today. Currently, it's only available 4 to 7 Thursday through Sunday. If you call outside of those hours, you will be connected with a 988 contact center. Up there is the number for the Hey HQ number, 785-865-2600. We understand broadly. I've talked a lot about, hey, someone who might really want to connect through one modality may not want to connect through another, or people have natural preferences for what modality they may want to communicate through or needs. So Hey HQ is really meant to serve youth who may be intimidated by talking to an adult about what's going on in their life, or may feel, for whatever reason, that talking to an adult, whatever it might be, get them in trouble. Many different reasons why youth choose not to engage with crisis services and choose not to engage with mental health services. So if we can lower that barrier for entry, provide an opportunity to talk to someone who may be less intimidating, someone their own age, maybe has similar language to them, can communicate with them in a way that makes sense to them. If that person might feel more inclined to reach out through crisis services through this modality, we want it to be something that's want to be able to cast that net, so to speak. If there is wait to connect through Hey HQ, there is the possibility that person may be directly connected with a 988 center. So these are important things to communicate when we're talking about Hey HQ, maybe these different services. These are oftentimes part of a broader, wider network. But we really want to assure that someone is able to connect or establish a service connection when they're really struggling. And to that end, too, I want to talk just briefly about mobile crisis response. A lot of different states are building mobile crisis response programs. Here in Kansas, our goal is to have 80% of Kansans connected to a mobile crisis response team in the next year and a half, 2 years. So what does that mean? Oftentimes, well, maybe not oftentimes, occasionally we find someone may have difficulty de-escalating over the phone or de-escalating with just a text conversation. Someone might display a certain level of acuity or have a certain level of need that might necessitate a connection with a person face to face. Through mobile crisis response teams, different crisis lines, different entities are able to connect that person with someone who is able to meet them in person at their home. So like I've mentioned, being able to provide crisis de-escalation services for individuals uh, in a way that is least restrictive is incredibly important. If we can provide crisis de-escalation for someone without them having to leave their own home or to be able to go to them when they are in the community experiencing a mental health crisis, we think that that's a better outcome than involving other aspects of the crisis continuum that might be more restrictive of that person. And we often find that those more restrictive services may result in getting bounced back to the beginning of the crisis continuum or needing to reconnect with services or a heightened acuity on the back end of that connection. So if we're able to connect that person in a least restrictive way, that gives us an opportunity to sort of do uh, do the best work possible we can for that person and ensure a best possible outcome. So those 988 teams or those mobile response teams can be connected to through 988, but they can also be connected to through those local crisis lines as well. Oftentimes that can be a much quicker way as well. Oftentimes those local crisis lines available to you in your community have a very good understanding of, hey, what are those mobile resources available to individuals in their community, and have that direct service connection to be able to connect. Also, another thing that's in the pipeline that I'll speak more broadly on is what does a 988 connection for someone who reaches out through 911 look like? I talk a lot with different dispatch centers about sort of what kind of calls they field. And I've had different dispatch centers all across the Midwest share with me that they're something like 20%, 25% of the phone calls that they're fielding through 911. There's no criminal component to the call. There's no medically emergent need for EMS. There's no need for fire. What is really being experienced is a mental health crisis. So what could be that pathway for that person who is calling 911, experiencing a mental health crisis, to be connected with someone who can provide hands-on sort of care for that person, whether in person through mobile response teams or through a phone call through different crisis lines. So I've thrown a lot of different things at you guys today. Really what I've got now for you guys is sort of some calls to action. I really hope that you guys will help me educate others about what 988 is, sort of what its current vision is, and where it hopes to go too. I hope you'll encourage others that help is also available today, that we have this powerful message that even if it feels like there is no one to talk to, that no one will listen, there is still always 3 numbers that you can dial, and the people on the other end of that phone number will listen. I think that's an incredibly powerful message that we can share for people. I hope that it will also help me ensure that 988 and those local crisis line numbers are something that's shared broadly on resource lists and other materials. I hope you'll help collaborate with those local contact centers as well to really strengthen the crisis continuum in your community, whether that's about services that your agency might provide or around encouragement to connect with those other aspects of the crisis continuum as well. And of course, I hope you'll advocate for us, advocate the importance as well of a least restrictive, readily available option for individuals who might be in crisis. My last slide just has my agency's website where you can find out more about us. I've also included SAMHSA's website, the accreditor for the Lifeline, federal program that manages a lot of different substance abuse, mental health services agency. They do a lot of incredibly important work around the country. Check out the work that they do with 988 and with all of their sort of programs. And if anyone wants to connect with me or other members of my agency, I've got my contact information listed here. We do have a case study now that we're going to go over. And I also want to have some space for questions as well, if anyone has anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and we'll get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brooks. That was really helpful and educational. So I will be sharing our case presentation for today. Um, so, moment. So what this will look like, I'll just kind of review some of the information of the case, and then we'll discuss questions and recommendations. So the case study that we have today states, I am a parent of a teenager. Last night, my son came home from school and I noticed that he wasn't his bubbly self. I asked him how his day was, and he said quietly, "Okay, Mom." I didn't want to push him to talk, but I know my son and knew something was on his mind. I proceeded to cook to dinner and saw my son just staring out the window, sitting on the couch. I walked over to him and said, "Do you want to talk, buddy?" I saw tears welled up in his eyes and he nodded his head yes. Quietly, he said, "I am worried about a friend at school." I responded, "What is worrisome?" He pulled out his phone and showed me some TikTok videos his friend had posted about taking their own life. I responded, "I'm glad that your friend has a friend like you." How can 988 help in this situation?
Yeah, I really like this case study because I think it really alludes to something incredibly important we do through the
Mhm.
Lifeline, and that's assist individuals who may be worried on behalf of someone else.
Yes.
Oftentimes we field phone calls from people who are worried about someone they know, might be a family member, might be a friend, who may have shared maybe very disturbing information with them. That person is concerned, is worried, and want to know what can be done to help. So we, through the Lifeline, do a lot of work to sort of help that person understand what that person's options are. But we also want to take some time to uh, give that person space to share that experience as well, of knowing that that person is really struggling.
Mhm.
It's incredibly difficult to be someone who's experiencing a suicidal crisis, to be in that moment. It is also incredibly difficult to be the only person that
Mhm.
knows that someone is experiencing a suicidal crisis. And oftentimes, we find that that acuity for suicide rises in instances where someone has a close personal contact with suicide. So we will take some time to do some light screening for this person to understand their own current level of risk for suicide. But then we'll want to work with that person to understand as much as possible about the current circumstance for that person. So that might look like uh, uh, understand working with that person to work toward their understanding of the safety profile of that individual. That might look like, uh, hey, what are the different aspects of means available to that person? Have they expressed a way that they might do it, or a time frame that they would end their life on, to really understand what the eminence of that current circumstance is. Dependent on that eminence, there are a number of different avenues we can take. For this person who has pulled out, who has been posting on social media about suicidal intent, that could be a conversation about uh, who is the best person to reach out to this person to establish a connection. One thing that we find, especially with youth, is uh, it might be that first person to see and really know that someone is experiencing a suicidal crisis may not be the best person to then reach out to that person and find and sort of be that first connection, that first support
Mhm.
person. Uh, we we would really encourage this youth to connect with a safe adult, someone who they trust, to be able to assure that connection with that youth, to reach out to them, to check in on them, whether in person or digital or through a virtual format, uh, to provide some first good guidance for that person, to then also have the understanding of, hey, what are the next steps as well? After we've connected with this person, what is the next thing we're going to do then? And that might look like a connection with school staff. The school mental health professional might look like a connection with a local mental health center, could look like a connection with a more acute placement, depending on what the level of acuity is, or less acute placement. It all really depends on what that person is, how that person's crisis is manifesting, what are the things that are needed for that individual in that moment to reach de-escalation, and what is needed to be able to assure continued safety. So we would want to help that person establish that first service connection with a safe person. And we would also encourage that person to encourage the safe person to encourage the individual to reach out through the lifeline as well, through whatever modality would make the most sense for them.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, of course, uh, 988 is it's a very it's a personal sort of service connection for that individual. We can't assure that someone will engage with the service that we provide. Uh, in those moments where we have good reason to be worried about someone for someone's life, someone's safety. We do have protocol around contacting other services like EMS to be able to assure the safety, the immediate safety of that person. So there are instances, circumstances where a welfare check, for instance, may be called for someone who reaches out through the lifeline, who isn't able to assure that immediate safety.
Mhm.
Another incredibly important thing for us to be able to talk about openly with people who are in this moment of suicidal crisis and exploring utilizing these different services. We really want to encourage people to have that conversation focused on safety when they are engaging these, because that's an important component of assuring that best possible outcome for that person.
Mhm.
So being upfront, open, honest about the importance of safety establishment for that individual, uh, and what could be some of those other uh, uh, options to that
Mhm.
person, uh, dependent on that level of acuity. So all of that to really say, we would help that person establish that initial connection, whether it's them or someone else that they know, or even us. If that it might mean connecting with that person initially through that initial service connection and encouragement to reach out to other crisis services. So we'll do that sort of almost like a TA sort of role with someone who might be really worried on behalf of someone.